Hi, everyone. We're going to jump into chapter 3, which will cover amino acids, peptides, and proteins. This is a first of multiple chapters that will focus on some grand concepts of proteins in general. But first, we're going to start small. We're going to think about the building blocks of amino acids, their structure and naming, and then peptides, their structure and properties. And then we'll also be talking about ionization behaviors for both those amino acids and and the peptides. So it's going to focus on their buffering ability and pKa. So some of the concepts we saw in chapter 2. And then we'll touch a little bit on the methods to characterize those peptides and proteins. This we'll explore in more detail for those of you in the lab section. We're going to try to just understand the conceptual basics of it in the lecture section. So proteins in general are one of the main agents of our biological function. They are going to be carrying out most of the biology and chemistry within living organisms. They have a variety of roles. For example, catalysis, they help to quicken a chemical reaction. The other name for this type of protein is called a enzyme. Examples of this are enolase and DNA polymerase. DNA polymerase is very important for the replication of DNA. Proteins also help with transport. So for example, hemoglobin, which is a protein that transports oxygen in the blood, or lactose permease. This is a protein that helps to transport lactose. That's for those of you who are lactose intolerant, that is the sugar molecule found in dairy. So it helps transport lactose in through the cell membrane. Proteins also help with structure in living organisms. So collagen, which makes up connective tissue, is just made of protein. So for example, that's what makes up the parts of our ear, the soft collagen. Keratin, which is responsible mostly for the makeup of our hair, our nails, or even feathers and horns in other animals. This is also built on proteins. Proteins also help with motion. So myosin and actin are both proteins of different structure that help make muscle tissue. They help us with movement. Actin also helps at a very cellular level with the movement of cells. Now, amino acids are an important part of this story of proteins. And we're going to start with talking about amino acids and their connection to proteins because they are the building blocks of proteins. Proteins are just polymers. They are a linear heteropolymer of amino acids. So breaking down that word, it's a polymer. Remember, polymer is just a string of building blocks, the same monomer, the same building block connected together. And this particular one is linear, meaning there's no branching. It's just amino acids in a row connected together. So this is a linear heteropolymer. The reason we're saying hetero is because there are 20 different amino acids. And we're going to get into those, but this is a polymer that can be made up of any of those 20 amino acids in any order, but it is linear. It's a string of amino acids connected together in some order. Now, amino acids themselves also play an important role in biology. So we're first going to focus on them singularly, because though they are very important for making up proteins and the structure of proteins, they also have their own unique properties. So, of course, they have the ability to polymerize, which is important for making proteins, but they also have useful acid-base properties. They also have different physical and chemical properties and functionality that is important within the body. And remember, this is just for the the amino acids by themselves. So singularly, not as part of a protein, amino acids also do some chemistry and biology. So to delve into the amino acid as both a building block and as a singular unit for biology, let's first talk about the structure of amino acids because structure really lends to the importance of them. Amino acids are built around a central carbon. They all have one central carbon that we call the alpha carbon, and they have 4 substituents. And these are centered around the alpha carbon in a tetrahedral. All amino acids have 3 substituents that are the same. And this is except for one, and we will get to that one, except for proline. All other amino acids are going to have a acidic carboxyl group. They also will have a basic amino group. And they will have, thirdly, a hydrogen attached. These 3 things are all the same in the amino acids. The 4th group is a unique group, and we call it the R group, R just to represent that it is a variable group, a different group. It is unique to each of the 20 amino acids. So every amino acid has its own R group, and that's what defines it as a different amino acid. For example, glycine, which is the simplest amino acid, its R group, its special group, is just another hydrogen. It's the simplest of all of them for this reason. Now let's get back to the other groups attached to a amino acid, the carboxyl group, the amino group, and the hydrogen. Remember, these first 2 are functional groups that we've covered. They are functional groups, carboxylic acid group and an amine group. I'm going to write those out first. So a carboxylic acid or a carboxyl group is this functional group. Okay, and an amino group is this functional group. So you've already seen these as functional groups. We've reviewed and covered them in organic chemistry. And I want to note something. The word amino acid comes from the fact that it has these functional groups. An amino and a carboxylic acid makes an amino acid. Now let's go over our 20 amino acids. I recommend to you that you also watch the video that I've posted and review really drawing these out, knowing their 1-letter codes, and knowing their structure. I'm going to give a quick review now, but again, look at the more detailed review on the structure of amino acids. One more thing I'll point out now, we see here, this is the base structure of the amino acid that I have highlighted at the top. You can see the carboxyl group, the amino group, the hydrogen, and the place where our R group is going to go. Notice that where our carboxyl group and our amino group are labeled, they look a little bit different than what I just wrote. I want to review something with you first. A carboxylic acid group, which again looks like this, can also be written as COOH. This is just an abbreviation of this group. Just like we can also write this amine group as NH2. Again, just an abbreviation of this group. Amino acids in their neutral form actually have the hydrogen gone on this carboxylic acid, giving it a negative charge, and an extra hydrogen on this amine group, giving it a positive charge. And so these abbreviations are written as such. We'll get more into where these charges come from, but I want you to just understand what these abbreviations mean. So COO minus is abbreviation for this structure. Don't forget where the structure and the abbreviation come from. So remember that COO minus represents this particular structure. Okay, so let's go over then each of our amino acids and their R group. I want to quickly go over their name, their structure, and their one-letter code. And I'm going to give you some of the helpful hints for me of remembering some of these one-letter codes because they're not all so easy to just remember without memorizing. The first amino acid we're going to go over is the simplest one, and I'm going to write our base as this. I'll write my COO minus for my carboxyl group, my NH3 for my amino group, my hydrogen. So these are the three groups that are present in every amino acid. And now we'll fill in the blank with our R group. The first is glycine, and its abbreviation is G. Its R group is just a simple hydrogen. Again, glycine is the first and simplest amino acid. From here, we'll get a little bit more complicated. The next amino acid is alanine, and its abbreviation is A. Pretty straightforward, A for alanine, and its R group is a methyl, a CH3. The next one will kind of add on to the chain of our alanine, and that is valine. This is a CH with a CH3 and a CH3. Its one-letter code is a V, and to help you remember that this structure goes with this name, you can see that this R group kind of resembles a V. We've attached a V onto our central carbon for valine. Next is a longer R group, which is leucine. This has a CH2, then a CH with a CH3 and a CH3. So notice this is like valine, except we've added an extra linker, an extra CH2 in between. And leucine's one-letter code is L. Isoleucine, the next one, is an isomer of leucine. So it is leucine but rearranged. Its one-letter code is I. And the rearrangement comes with one of these CH3 groups. This CH3 group is moved to the middle here. And this is now a CH2. And yeah, CH2, CH3. So that is isoleucine, which is I. The next one I am going to review is one that you probably have heard of before. If you haven't heard of some of these, it is tryptophan. Now, tryptophan is usually thought of around Thanksgiving with turkey. It is an amino acid made of rings. So I'm going to draw it as the ring form, which is like this. And it has a double bond here, an H here. Now, tryptophan has a interesting one-letter code. Its one-letter code is W. And I usually say it as tryptophan to remember that there is a W present there. Okay, the next one up is proline. I erased my base. Okay, proline is going to have its special linker. So proline is a ring that actually links back on the amino acid. And it links from our alpha carbon to the amino group here. It actually has a CH2, CH2, and makes this a NH2. As such. So it's a 3-membered ring that links back onto the amino group. This is proline, and its abbreviation is P. So you can think of the P as looping back on itself, doing this action to remember the structure of proline. The next one we're going to review is cysteine. Go back to my base. Okay, so cysteine, which is written like this. Pen, sorry, is pausing. This is going to be abbreviated with the letter C. And it is a CH2 group with an SH. So cysteine has a sulfur group on it. Our next one is going to be similar in that it has a sulfur, but it is methionine. Now, methionine has this thio in it. Thiols are sulfur groups. So you remember that methionine also has a sulfur in it. Now it's kind of in the middle here instead of with cysteine, which has the sulfur group at the end. And methionine's one-letter code is M. All right, our next one is phenylalanine. Phenylalanine, its name implies some of its structure. So its one-letter code is not P. P was for proline. Phenylalanine actually has a F as its one-letter code. So phenylalanine. Now remember, alanine just is one simple carbon. This is basically like you have an alanine and a phenyl group. Phenyl is a benzene ring, so that's CH2 and then a benzene ring. This is how you remember phenylalanine. Again, F for the F, and it's a alanine with a phenyl group on it. Okay, next up, we're gonna get into some of the more polar amino acids. We're going to look first at asparagine. This amino acid is a CH2 with a amide on it. So it's a carbonyl and an NH2 group. This is a polar amino acid. And again, this one, asparagine, is not going to have a as its one-letter code. Asparagine actually is going to have a N as its one-letter code. So asparagine is going to be the one-letter code of N. Next up is going to be the elongated form of asparagine. So now we're going to write an extra CH2. So CH2, CH2, and then there is again an amide group with an NH2 here. Now this one is called glutamine, and its one-letter abbreviation is a Q. And I remember this by saying glutamine. Glutamine has a Q. All right, after glutamine is tyrosine. To remember, drawing tyrosine is like a tire in the middle. That's how you remember that it has this ring here with an OH at the end. Tyrosine. Now, tyrosines one-letter abbreviation is going to be, in this case, a Y. Tyrosine is going to be a Y. Tyrosine. And again, to remember the structure, I remember a tire, and that helps me remember that there is this ring tie and an O, tyrosine. And again, one-letter abbreviation of Y. Okay. Next up is serine. And serine is the simplest of the polar amino acids. It's a CH2 with an OH group on it. This is serine, and its one-letter code is simply an S. After serine is going to be threonine. Threonine is an elongated version of serine. You can think that in the alphabet, we have S followed by T, and threonine is the abbreviation T. And it is similar to serine, except that it has this extra CH3 group on it. So it's the next one over at the elongated version. Serenine, then threonine, and again, S and then T. All right, so now into some of the charged groups. And you're going to notice that some of these groups are going to mimic polar groups I just drew. I'll point those out. First up is going to be aspartic acid or aspartate. You'll see it written both ways. I'll write both. Aspartic acid. Another way to write this is aspartate. This one-letter code is actually a D. And I remember this by saying aspartic acid. So say this T kind of like a D to remember that the one-letter code is D. And aspartic acid or aspartate looks a lot like aspargine. It has one CH2 group here, but instead of a amide group, it has a carboxylic acid group. And this carboxylic acid group, similar to the carboxylic acid group on our amino acid, can also lose its hydrogen, and you will often see it written with a negative charge on it. And again, we can also always abbreviate these by writing COO minus. So this is aspartic acid. And again, parallel to what we just saw in our polar ones, we saw glutamine or glutamine, as I said, was kind of elongated a version of aspargine. we also have an amino acid called glutamic acid, or again, this can be written as glutamate. These are the same things. They're just written two different forms, glutamic acid or glutamate. This one letter abbreviation is an E, and I remember that it is glue, which you spell Glue, glutamic acid. And glutamic acid is similar in its structure to aspartic acid, except that just like with our pair asparagine and glutamine, it has an extra CH2 group. Excuse me. And again, it has a carboxylic acid on the end, which I will abbreviate as COO minus. All right, last are some of our other charged amino acids. So they also are going to have these charges on them, like we saw with aspartic acid and glutamic acid. The first one is arginine. Its one letter code is R, like a pirate, arginine. Arginine is a long chain of CH2s. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and I have to curve here a little bit. And then we're going to have 2 amine groups attached here. And I'm going to actually rewrite this to give myself a little bit more room. And I'm going to write it in my bond stick form. So here's 1 carbon, 2 carbons, 3 carbons. Here's our 4th carbon. And this is attached to an NH2. And it has a double bond with an NH2 plus. So this again is a charged group, arginine, and we remember it because of the R in arginine for our one letter code. A similar group to arginine is lysine. Lysine has a similar structure, except instead of these 2 amine groups here, it again has 1, 2, 3, 4 carbons, CH2 groups, and at the very end has a simple NH3 plus group. This is lysine. Now, its one letter abbreviation is K. And there's not much to help remember that it's K, except that in the alphabet, you follow L with K, or you follow K with L. So this is the closest. We already used L for leucine, and we already used Y for tyrosine. So there's no other abbreviation except K. And again, just remember that L and K are close in the alphabet. All right, and our last amino acid, we've gone through all others, is histidine. Okay, and histidine is another charged amino acid, but it has a ring. So it again has a CH2 group here. And then it's going to have a ring of a carbon with a CH, an NH, and then a double bond, CH, NH, single bond. Okay, so this N group here has a positive charge on it. So this is a ring of carbon and nitrogen, so it has internal amines within this ring. And sorry, there's double bond here too. And a positive charge on the corner of the ring here. Histidine's one-letter code is pretty simple, straightforward. It is an H. All right, so we have gone through all of the amino acids. Again, I implore that you review either this video to help you with remembering those one-letter codes and the structure, or you watch the other video, which goes into a little bit more detail of the amino acids and their structure.